Hello everybody, welcome to Talk About Houses. My name is Todd Miller. I'm the owner-broker of Nevada Realty Solutions here in Las Vegas. Today we're going to talk about the market forecast for the housing market for the year 2021, which is next year. And we're going to start off by talking about what happened in 2020. So as you're all probably aware, what happened in 2020 was we had a pandemic. We started off the year fine, and then next thing we know by March is, states are locking down, cities are locking down, and people are losing their jobs. And the people that aren't losing their jobs, a lot of them who have tech jobs or jobs where they can work remotely, they are working remote. So bad things are happening in the economy. The stock market tanked, so the expectation when that happens is the housing market's going to follow. And you're going to probably be surprised to find out that's not really what's happening. The housing market didn't follow, and there are some specific reasons for that, and we're going to talk about those moving forward. Okay, so the most important thing here is you have big cities, and then you have the rest of the country. And they're two separate things. They're two separate economies. In big cities, you have big tech companies, San Francisco, for example, in New York City, you have banking, you have all these high density jobs where people sit in big office buildings with hundreds of people on one floor at cubicles. They're very close together. And that's how, that's how the cities get their value, is they have all these core group of highly trained workers in one area, and you do business there. So in New York, it's banking. In San Francisco, it's tech. And in Los Angeles, it's Hollywood, things like that. So you have the rest of the country, which doesn't really follow that model. The rest of the country is substantially different. So we're going to look at what happened in cities and then what happened in the rest of the country specifically regarding real estate. So you're in a big city, it locked down. What's the first thing that happened? Well, first thing that happened is these businesses still need to operate. And they told the people, just work from home. Just stay in your house and work from your house. Well, tech workers specifically, who are much younger, they didn't want to sit around in a city with nothing going on and pay a ton of money in rent. So they all left. Same thing happened in New York City. They all left. They went to the suburbs. They moved back to Nashville or wherever they're from. And their employer said, we really don't care where you're working from. We just care that you do your job. Well, you're probably thinking, well, how many people could that be really in the US? Well, the number is somewhere between 14 million and 23 million people are now working remote that weren't previously working remote a year ago. It's a lot of people. So what that did was it caused people to leave cities. That's the number one thing. People left cities. And for example, 81% of all restaurants in New York City did not pay rent last month. 81%. My guess is a third of those restaurants a year from now won't exist. You'll have 2/3 of the restaurants that you have, because restaurants just can't make it if you can't put put people into a restaurant. And the reason I bring up restaurants is because restaurants as restaurants go is how the rest of everything's going to go. It's how retail's going to go. It's how other things are going to go. Another thing is how office space is going to go. Because if you can't put people together in a restaurant for a couple hours to have some food, you're not going to be able to put them together in an office building to work in a high density situation. So how does that affect the housing market? So when people leave cities and they move out, everything in the city gets worse for all the businesses, because there's less people to serve the business. So businesses do poor. When they do poor, they lay off people. What do those people do? They leave. So you have this sort of, over time, this degradation of cities where the people just flee the city. And you lose all your economies of scale, economies of scope that these cities have as they go to the suburbs. Well, what that does in the real estate market in the city is it makes the home prices go down because there's less demand, more houses go on the market. Rents collapse. Almost the first thing that always happens in any market is you see rents. Wherever rents go, housing is going to follow. So, for example, in San Francisco, there are apartment buildings that used to have waiting list, 30, 40 people to get in, and now they have 30, 40 empty units, and they're telling people, hey, our rent is, half of what it was, and plus we'll give you a free month if you'll sign up for a year, because they just don't have people to fill them. The flip side of that is, where did people go? Well, they left the cities, and they went to other smaller cities, or cities where maybe the rules are a little easier, or where that it's cheaper to live. So, for example, in Las Vegas, we become the beneficiary of San Francisco and Los Angeles and these other cities, because they have all flooded over here for cheap housing, for entertainment. We still have stuff going on. You can still go to restaurants, and you can still do your tech work remotely. You just, your rent is probably a quarter of what it would be there, or you can buy a house for a fifth of the price and get a pretty nice house. So you're probably saying, but wait, there are jobs, and there's job loss, and that's got to hurt the housing market. Well, there's something else at play here, and that's mortgage rates. Okay, so the mortgage rates are determined by banks who compete for the mortgage dollar from the home buyers. The home buyer is getting a mortgage, and they're trying to fill loans. And so the way the mortgage rate is set doesn't matter what the job market is. It doesn't matter what what should happen. What matters is, what's the federal funds rate? Now, the federal funds target rate, this is the target rate set by the Federal Reserve, that banks, savings and loans, and other lending institutions can loan money to each other on an overnight basis. There's a target rate. The target rate is 0.25%. Okay, so they set that as a target rate. But the actual rate that most banks and savings and loans loan money on an overnight basis is about 0.1%. It's very cheap for these banks and lending institutions to get money to loan out. Okay, so they don't become loaned up, where they can't loan out any more money. Now, when you're getting money that cheap and you're trying to make a return on it, that you have to compete with other banks. So right now we see mortgage rates about 2.9 to 3%, which is historically the lowest it's ever been. And the reason it's that low is because money is cheap to get, they're competing, and there's still a strong demand for housing. Now, the forecast going forward is that's not going to change. The Federal Reserve has said they're not going to make substantial changes to monetary policy. The banks are still going to compete for those mortgage loans, 2.93%, because what are you going to do? Go out and buy a 10-year T-bill for 1%? You're not going to get a good return on that. These mortgage-backed securities are still a good deal, even at 2.9 to 3%. They're a good investment. So the forecast for 21 is mortgage rates are going to stay low, and when mortgage rates are low, it becomes easier to buy housing, and it's going to help the housing market. So another thing, as we talked about before, people left the cities, they came to Las Vegas or other towns, they went to the suburbs. But remember, people aren't going to restaurants, they're not going to shows, they're not doing a lot of things, they're not traveling, they're not getting on airplanes, they're not going to Hawaii, and they're not going to Paris. So what are they doing with all this cash? Well, a lot of people now have cash that they didn't have previously, and what they found out is, for 3.5% down, you get an FHA loan. So now you have people flush with cash to make real estate down payments. And when you add more people into the market looking for homes, that tends to hold up or increase home prices, which is exactly what we've seen in our market. We have very low inventory in Las Vegas. We have home prices still appreciating, and we have it because people have left the cities and come here. And when you look at the cities, that they have the opposite effect. So when you look at the whole country as a whole, you have two forces happening at once, right? You have the low cost of money, and then you have some people out of work, people getting unemployment. But then when you look at individual markets, they're completely different, because some little markets are killing it and other big markets are doing very poorly. So that's a trend you'll probably continue to see in 2021. If you're looking to buy a house in San Francisco, you may want to wait 6 months or a year and see how it all falls out. If you're wanting to buy in Las Vegas or a city that maybe Tulsa or Nashville or Austin, you might want to do it now, okay? Especially if it's Austin, because all the tech companies are all going to Texas. So you're probably asking yourself, hey, why all of a sudden are people buying houses, and are they really buying that many houses? I mean, it's a pandemic. People can't even go out. How can they see a property to even buy it? Well, this may surprise you, but the largest month for purchases in the last 15 years was in 2006. So it was 14 years ago. We had the biggest month ever nationwide for home purchases. Well, what was interesting was that record just got broken July of 2020. So when the lockdown started to ease, everyone went out and bought houses. So in July, you have all these closings, and all these people are now buying houses that weren't buying houses previously. So you have this huge rush of people flooding in to now grab real estate from markets where it makes sense to buy a house. And that's a huge thing, because this 14-year low, we had the crash, 7, 8, 9, and then it's been building back, and now we've sort of reached a crescendo in 2020. Even with the pandemic, people are still buying houses. I expect in 2021 to see the continued trend of cities getting worse. So I was looking in online at houses in San Francisco, and in the Mission District, for example, in San Francisco, right by the BART station, to get a 2-bedroom condo was about $1.4 million. And now I'm starting to see deals pop up online. You can now get a pretty decent 2-bedroom condo in the Mission District, about 800 square feet, for about $800,000, which is a lot less than you could have bought it maybe a year ago. The same thing is happening in rents. There are rents all in the city of San Francisco, $2,000 to rent a studio. Before that would have been $3,000 or $4,000. The same thing's happening in New York City, the Upper West Side. A lot of people who had gone there to work and live have just bailed, and they've left the city. There are apartments that were $4,000 a month rent. You can get them for $2,500 now. I believe that trend will continue, because while renters lead the market, the effect of them leaving lags the market, because it takes a while before landlords actually decide, hey, I need to lower my rents. Because they say, hey, I rented this place for 20 years at this amount. I'm going to keep getting it. And then eventually they look around and realize that they're not going to get it. And that takes a while when in a declining market. The converse is, when the market's increasing, it takes a while too, because landlords are afraid to raise the rent too much because they won't get anybody. And then what happens is they get like 5 or 6 applications on one property. What's happening in Las Vegas is that's what we're seeing. We'll put a house on the rental market, 5 or 6 people will apply to rent the house. And then, sometimes you can say, well, if you pay more in rent, I'll give you the house. And that's a trend that's going to happen in 2021. You're going to see some markets where rents stay even, okay, middle tier. You're going to see places, Seattle, San Francisco, Portland, New York City, LA, big cities, where rents decline. And then you're going to see outlying cities, suburbs, places like that, where rents will increase and stay strong. That's another thing that's going to help the investor market, because people will see strong rental market and they'll want to buy investment properties. They're competing with owner occupants, and that helps hold up the housing market, help pushes home prices even higher up. Another thing that COVID and the pandemic has caused are schools to close. And you're probably thinking, well, what does schools closing have to do with people in their houses? Well, what's happening is you have, 2 kids, they each have their room. They used to go to school and they were gone all day and you had the house to yourself. But now the kids are home all day. Matter of fact, they're home, probably all the time, because they don't go to their sport, they don't go to friends' house, they're in the house. And what's happened is, especially in suburbs, people are tired of their house. They say it's not small, it's not big enough, it's too small. We didn't buy this house with the intent everyone would be in it all the time. So what we're seeing is this trade-up buyer, okay? They are deciding to take their, 2,000 square foot, 3-bedroom house that they bought for 4 people, and then they're gonna get a bigger house. So they're gonna get 2,400 square feet. They're gonna get, they want a bigger house, bigger rooms for the kids, in the whole thing. And that does affect the housing market. Now you'll say, well, kids will go back to school. And they will. Eventually the kids will be back in school and then people will be happy. But till then, there are going to be people moving. We're seeing this in pretty much all the suburb markets where people are upgrade buying. Everyone's trying to move up a little to a little bit bigger house. With a slack monetary policy, it's easy for them to do. So you're probably wondering, hey, is this a bubble? Is this thing going to burst just like 2006, 7, 8? That thing just blew up. And the answer is no. Two things happened then that aren't happening now. One was subprime market. Okay, the subprime market where you could state your income and get 5 houses. I'm a cocktail waitress. I make 10 grand a month. And you just go out and buy 5 separate houses and put renters in them. So that's the first thing. Subprime market. Anybody could get a loan. Didn't matter. It was not rational. Okay, that's been tightened up. They're back to conforming standards. It's nothing like what it was. It's nothing like that at all. Okay. The second thing is the supply of homes. The secondary market incentivized builders to build like crazy, and so California, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Florida, parts of Texas. Even the Washington, Arizona, the builders came out and they created all these new building jobs and they built like crazy. They overbuilt. Well, in 2021, the housing market across the nation in the U.S. is only expected to increase by 2%. 2% is not very much. It's very healthy, very normal. And because we're not going to see a ton of building and new construction, we're not going to see a collapse in the housing market because there's just not the supply. The supply is not going up fast enough. It's only really going fast enough up to meet the demand. And in some markets, it won't meet the demand. And so prices will go up. In other markets, they don't even have to build. Prices will go down in those markets. So expect to see about a 2% increase in the housing market 2021, but not to see a collapse or a fall in prices. Something else that could potentially drive the housing market higher for move-up buyers. So the Cato Institute did a study and found that anywhere from 3 to 9% of all families with children have removed their children from public schools because the schools have gone from an in-class experience to Zoom or online. So now that parents have the kids home and they're choosing to do one of two things. They're either enrolling their children in an online school or they are homeschooling the children because in some cases it's just easier to do that. So they've taken their kids out of public schools, 3 to 9%, and there will be a lot of these people who don't go back to school. When this happens, they're going to be, same thing we talked about before, they're going to be in the house more. And when they're in the house more, they're going to want more room. They're going to be doing more in the house and they're going to need more space for each other. So expect that to drive not only new homes being built larger, but move-up buyers in the suburbs. So to sum up what is going to happen, forecasted in the 2021 real estate market, pretty much across the nation, but mostly in suburbs and cities that are not San Francisco, New York, etc. Okay, you have people with a lot of cash because they haven't been traveling, they haven't been spending money. You have a high demand for housing, and then you have very cheap borrowing because of Federal Reserve policies and banks competing. All three of these add up to a very strong housing market. So if you're anywhere in Vegas, if you're in Austin, if you're in Nashville, if you're in the suburbs, not maybe downtown Chicago, but maybe if you're in the suburbs, it's going to be great. If you're in the San Francisco suburbs, you'll probably be okay. If you're in the city, probably not. San Diego, you're probably going to be okay. San Diego hasn't been hammered as much as some of the other cities have. Is anything, though, if you want to know what's going to happen in your local market, you need to find somebody who has expertise in that market, who can look at what renters are doing, because renters always lead the market. Your renters, if they're pushing rents up, then the housing market's going to go up. If they're pushing rents down, the housing market's going to go down. So you find out what renters are doing, find out what's happening in your market. That is my market forecast for 2021. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you very much. Please subscribe. and I'll see you on another video. Thanks.